Welcome to Incidents, the customer empathy workshop you never wanted. My name is Ryan McDonald. I am delighted to be here with you all. I'm a responder advocate for Fire Hydrant, and it's my job to hang out with folks and chat about incident management and incident processes, which sounds rough if it's not your thing, but for me, like this is a thing that I'm absolutely stoked about. So the next question, somewhat obviously, is like, how and why did you end up with such a silly job? Like, this is just a silly thing to be doing. Incidents are a persistent part of my professional life. So I started my career, my professional career, as an outdoor educator. I led expeditions for Outward Bound for a number of years. Rafting, mountaineering, climbing, 22-day-long expeditions in the backcountry in the western United States. This is something I did for many years. And thankfully, in that line of work, while incidents are still a part of my world, they were far less often than in software. Incidents in that world involved toolkits involving search and rescue, right? Emergency medical services, evacuations, all that fun stuff. So very much more on the real world side of things. Quick joke, and I know that we're fading here because it's right before lunch, but I appreciate you all sticking with me. What's the difference between an outdoor education instructor and a Domino's pizza? Nobody? A Domino's pizza can feed a family. So I caved to capitalism, and I ended up moving into the world of tech. As much fun as it was to be a dirtbag and run around out in the woods with a bunch of students. So, but from my initial, like from the jump, right? I was an intern in the world of software. I was an intern engineer. And someone explained to me that we were having a software outage. And I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And they're like, yeah, it's a big deal. People are running around freaking out, botch deploy, right? Like something terrible has happened. And I was like, so what's our problem here is the website is down. And they're like, yeah. And I was like, okay. So like no one's bleeding out. Nobody's dying. We don't have to call a helicopter. Like, perfect. This is amazing. I was like, I'm going to love this space. This is going to be so much fun. But with that love of incidents, that just continued to develop and grow for me. So I ended up managing incident management programs, regardless of my title, right? You come in as an engineer, you show interest in something like incident management, and suddenly everybody's like, hey, what are you doing like next week? You want to run? You want to help us manage this program, provide some feedback for this document? So with that, I just kept getting pulled in more and more. And for me, I eventually ended up doubling down, and I became a founding member of Incident Management Group at Twilio. This inevitably led to me needing an incident management tool. And as most of you know, at the point in time where you need an incident management tool, you're probably experiencing quite a bit of stress. So my tenure at Twilio wasn't particularly long, but I did get them a good distance with their incident management process. I also happened to meet the fine folks at Fire Hydrant. I brought in their tool to Twilio, which was great. And it inevitably led to them coming back to me later and saying like, hey, we would love for you to hop in and serve as a customer success engineer for us. We'd love for you to come chat with customers about how to manage their incidents, which is not a path that I had ever particularly thought would happen, right? I wasn't like, oh, I would love to go get in front of customers. Like, that sounds super fun, right? That was always something that I could keep at a nice arm's length from myself. But that's how I landed here in front of you all, a hungry crowd. So we'll move on to the next. Quick story time. And you all are mostly SREs, DevOps engineers. You all have probably been in this kind of situation before. So slight trigger warning. This is dramatization. No actual customer experience or engineering mental state was harmed in the making of this story. You sit down, it's feeling like a pretty good day. You get some coffee in you, like things are definitely trending towards above average, right? Feeling pretty good. It's going to be one of those like to-do list destruction, flow state, the kind of thing that people, write conference talks about. You go ahead, pop open your IDE, get started with your day. PagerDuty has decided that you have other things to be doing today, aside from whatever productive activity you had planned. You remember last week those flapping alerts, like put a little tally on the note to go check that out and make sure that's not what's happening now. And lo and behold, this is a live one. You've got a real one. Not only are you getting paged, not only are you getting pulled out of your flow state, customers are legitimately being impacted by this incident. So take a deep breath. You remind yourself, above average day, things are going well. This has potential. We can still make the best out of this, right? Go ahead, kick things off, get started with your incident management process. And you're just starting to investigate things. And out of nowhere, customer support busts into your chat, right? They're all up in your business. And it's just like immediate. It's all about what's happening, what's the customer experience, who's impacted, is this specific thing impacted, on and on and on, right? And like whatever chill you have been able to maintain throughout the course of your morning, done, right? It's gone. So first off, let's collectively take a moment, right? These are not fun days, right? When you're getting blown up, you're having somebody come in and aggressively get in your face about something that you've just barely started to dig into. Apologies here. So I think a lot of us that have spent time in the seat, like your immediate thought is, right, this sounds like a process problem, right? This sounds like something that's tractable, using something like a RACI chart, maybe like digging into training for customer support. God forbid you need an incident commander, right, to come in and help direct traffic and ensure that the correct folks are asking the right questions at the right time. And while you wouldn't be wrong, like this is absolutely, potential outcome from something like this, I would make the argument that this is actually a deficit in customer empathy, maybe even broadly inside of your organization, right? So when I say customer empathy, what do I mean here? And this is the action of understanding, being aware, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings of your customers. And I can see some of you, like, eyes are starting to glaze. We're getting to that point of the presentation where it's like, all right, I can properly check out now. We're talking about feelings, right? Soft skills, interpersonal, yada, yada, right? But I would argue that this can be a steering force, not only for incident management, but for your organization at large. So stick with me for just a little bit longer. So with that, there are a few outcomes that I think focusing on customer empathy can help you drive inside of your organization. Incidents can suck less for customers, right? You can find more synergy, right, with those folks that you end up working with throughout the course of an incident. And you can actually get more from your incidents by focusing on customer empathy. So we'll go ahead and dive in. The first thing that's important here is to understand your customer's expectations. So missed expectations are the basis for any kind of relational strife. I'm sure all of us are familiar. It's no different with customers, right? So the first thing that you can do as a responding engineer is to gain exposure in your product. Take the time, spin up a test account, whatever it is that looks like in your world. Take a moment and just understand the basic flow of like how customers are actually using your tool. This shared understanding of what the tool is like and how the tool works can add a ton of value when it comes time to be inside of an incident with someone else who you're trying to communicate with. If you don't have the ability to spin this up, or as a really good proxy, sit down and pair with someone else in your organization who does, right? So customer support folks, people that are giving product demos, folks in user research. There are a wealth of people in your organization that you can probably tap to chat with about what is the actual direct customer experience like? What are those basic flows that people are working through? So the next thing that you can do is inside of your incident processes, make a way to display customer impact during those incidents. I mean, we've all been in the situation, right, where the first thing that any stakeholder, customer success, customer support person asks is, what is the impact, right? You're deep triaging something. If you haven't even tried to take a crack at that answer and putting that where someone can find it, that's the first thing that someone's going to be tapping you on the side of the head about in the middle of an incident. And then lastly, and there's a ton of professionals here that can speak to this far better than I can, but practicing chaos engineering, trying to understand what the product looks like when it's having a bad day, right? Or in a degraded state. And chaos engineering can give you some great visibility into those different states that you might end up with customers staring directly at. So, understanding customer expectations can lead to incidents sucking less for those customers. Customers never want to have incidents, but you do have an opportunity to continue to build those relationships by having better incidents, right? Getting the people who are communicating with your customers the things that they need in a way that works for them is just going to lead to a better experience. And while that maybe initially sounds kind of squishy, like this ties directly into like your customer sentiment of your product. So it's like, do folks stick around? Like this affects NRR, this affects ARR. These are like big business impacting things. Sentiment plays a huge role in, and I would argue that by focusing a little bit more on the customer experience up front, we can give folks a better experience on their worst days, which helps inform that whole process. On to the next. So I would say it's not strictly about collaborating, but partnering with your support organization. So customer support. Raise your hand if you've been in customer support before, really quickly. Okay, fantastic. This is good. There are enough of you here. First off, I'm not making fun of you. Just give me a moment. Customer support is unbelievably difficult, right? Serving as that sponge between an angsty customer and having a problem that is not something that's tractable for you, it's like an unbelievable skill. It's like a superhero level power to be able to sit with those customers and to provide them with an experience. For our purposes here, and I know that you all are here for deep analysis, right? Like SREcon is definitely about getting into the weeds here. I have captured the experience of working with an angsty customer success engineer, customer support engineer. So this GIF, oldie, but a goodie. This is what it can feel like to be on the receiving end of a request from someone who is customer facing in the middle of an incident. And I think it could be pretty easy to say like, wow, okay, that's like a pretty harsh take, right? Obviously there's some anger there, but we're all about breaking things down here, right? So if we look at this frame by frame, we really get deep into this whole thing. You can take a look here. We've started with probably something pretty close to anger, maybe aggression. You might get, something thrown at you. As you progress though, you realize this is desperation. This person who has maybe spent time building relationships with customers, trying to give folks exactly what they need, are suddenly in this untractable situation where they are the only thing between really pissed off customers and a broken product. So for us as engineers, it behooves us to try and help those folks feel comfortable, feel excited, and feel empowered throughout the course of an incident. With that, partnering with your support organization, in my opinion, is one of the best things that you can do as an incident manager or a responding engineer. Although, as you all can probably attest, building rapport with someone in the middle of a crisis is difficult, right? Like, we're not going to sit down and be like, hey, nice shirt. Like, how are you doing? What's going on, right? this is going to be one of those things where it's like, I need information from you, give it to me now, right? So if you take some time beforehand and really proactively build rapport with support, you can have much, much better outcomes. And this isn't just like hang out and get a beer necessarily, right? Like obviously inviting folks to events, the notion of inclusion is a huge thing here with support. But support has a unique set of skills that can be leveraged in a lot of other places inside of an organization. A really great example that I appreciated from one of my roles at SREday is support actually ran product onboarding for every person who joined the company. They're an expert in the product space. The more senior folks, they understood the architecture as well or better than some of the engineers, just from their like sort of integration level, acceptance level kind of work that they were doing. So we would pull them in, right? And they ended up being tent poles inside of our organization. When folks had questions about the product, instead of going and talking to a product team, people would go to our support group. So there are definitely ways that you can kind of empower and sort of flip the script on that sort of standard support role space, right? Like they have a ton of valuable skills. Additionally, like mentorship opportunities are huge. A lot of us are more tenured engineers. We've spent time in the field, and I think spending time intentionally with people in support can be a huge boost for a lot of folks. And I won't speak broadly for all of support, but I know more than a handful of folks that have used support as a way to get into organizations, a way to get into tech, to start to grow their career. So there are a ton of opportunities to proactively build that kind of rapport. Moving into the notion of what you can do in the course of an incident, really, really clear and crisp communication interfaces are the lifeblood of a good relationship with support and customer-facing teams. By setting really clear expectations, you can be sure that nobody's gonna like bust in the middle of your triage session, your investigation, and derail everything, right? Because they know, hey, this is coming in 30 minutes. This is coming in an hour, right? And in the offhand chance that you set an expectation and you can't meet it, like just like anyone else, having a vacuum in terms of communication is terrible. Let folks know, right? Communicate proactively. Let them know when you learn new things. Consider them more like partners and less like irritating stakeholders that you have to placate. Cool. And then the last one here, I've even done this in the course of this presentation. It's easy to think of support as simply stakeholders, right? Someone who must be informed about something, as opposed to letting them behind the curtain and giving them that notion of like, hey, congratulations, you're a first-class responder. We consider you to be part of this process and not just someone who consumes an output from it. So what this can look like, and actually there's a little bit of setup that's sometimes required. For folks that have worked in support, there's often this notion of you have a queue, right? You have a series of tickets that you need to respond to at a particular period of time. Reaching out to support and setting the expectation that when a support person engages with an incident, that's their focus. They need to be entirely dedicated to this incident. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to focus. They're not going to be able to bring their best game. And they're not going to be able to be useful. So trying to help them break that cycle of, you need to go grind through another 10 tickets here in the next half an hour can be really helpful and something that we in engineering can help push on and help those folks. So once you've created this level playing field and support can focus in the same way that everyone else can, what do you do, right? Like, what do you do with a support person who's kind of hanging out in an incident? And I would argue, just like their domain expertise in the product was displayed earlier and used by some of the organizations I've been with, support can add a ton of value in terms of verifying impacts, gathering additional evidence, pulling together tickets, anecdotes from customers, right? Like information is the lifeblood of incidents. You having a great idea and running off and implementing it sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't, right? Red herrings are all over the place. So the more information that we can gather, especially from different sources, the easier it is for us to vet and validate the state of your world and how you'd like to move forward. Another way that support can be exceptionally useful is testing changes, right? If you have a way to deploy, whether it's to a lower environment, feature flags, anything like that, getting support to dig in and verify changes that you're attempting to make to mitigate the problem is an excellent way to engage support and a great way to bifurcate efforts, right? So there is a bonus outcome as well. And the fact that we have so many support folks former support folks sitting with us today, I think is indicative of this, is that support is actually your secret hiring bench. Like, support folks end up building this amazing domain knowledge. They often also bring a great wealth of understanding about how the organization works. So when you're busy trying to hire your product, program, project manager, customer success manager, more junior engineers even, consider customer support. I think they're a fantastic source of these things, especially if you spend the time cultivating and building that relationship so that those folks feel included and excited about being part of your organization. Because I think, as a side note, it's pretty easy too for support be a huge place for churn, where folks just come, they put in time, they end up leaving, right? And you're bleeding organizational knowledge at that point. So, partnering with your support organization will allow you to actually feel good about those interactions and have more positive interactions throughout the course of the incident. As a lot of us know, anytime that you're in a crisis and working with other people, things can be either stressful, or if you feel like you're in a safe space and you feel like you're working together as a team, it can be an amazing source of collaboration. The ability for those aha moments with groups of domain experts sitting together, cranking on a hard problem, that happens, but you have to be intentional about it, right? So once again, taking that time beforehand can really pay dividends later. All right, and the last one here, we'll get you off to lunch. Broaden your incident retrospectives. So incident retrospectives can get a rap, can kind of have this idea or this notion tied around them that they have to be RCA, root cause, technical exercises, right? You're digging into problems, you're extracting action items that are always engineering centric. And I think getting away from that can add a ton of value, right? And one way to do that is to inject customer empathy into a lot of those discussions. So rather than having these be engineering exclusive spaces, try and get your customer-facing responders to join in, right? Bring them in, make space, make airtime for them to talk about their experience during the incident. And some of the things that can happen there is you can start to learn that we're actually over-communicating. Customers didn't care, right? We had Sev 1 community cadence, right? And I busted my ass to get information to people, and it just wasn't needed, right? So this isn't always a tightening of the process noose. This can be a great opportunity to understand where you can actually relax, where things are not necessarily necessary. Also, post-incident reviews, postmortems, whatever you care to call them, they're hard to schedule. They're a pain in the butt, right? And trying to get everybody who has domain expertise and was engaged in an incident, dynamically built team to suddenly align on schedules and get something together in the next 72 hours is really difficult. Doing quick async check-ins with those folks, especially support folks that might be on a really different schedule from you, trying to get their perspective and extract that and then act as a proxy for them in those meetings if you don't have the ability to actually have them join. We talk about incident postmortems or retrospectives, but I would encourage us to start to break these things out. Think about things as maybe an initial investigation, right? An initial post-incident review. Start to divide things out by themes. There's nothing stopping you from having multiple meetings, gathering incremental quantities of value and more of the story to help create more of a holistic picture about your incident. And then the last thing, and I see some orgs do this really well, and I see others that have literally fought me tooth and nail, which always blows my mind. Incidents are a huge source of learning. You're like looking at a failure state, not just of your application, but potentially of your whole organization. There's a ton of learning that you can extract from incidents if you take the time, right? So try and capture more of your improvements than exclusively the things you need to avoid getting paged at, whenever in the afternoon. And then the last bit of this is, I've also seen folks try and really acutely focus on issues relating directly to the incident. This to me is a huge anti-pattern. You're potentially collecting information that can land in teams' backlogs. So product managers are looking at these kind of things. Process managers can be looking at these kinds of improvements. All of these things can be slotted because a lot of the solutions for the problems you experience in an incident aren't, a 20-minute task, right, that you could hand to an engineer. They might be re-architecting parts of your architecture, re-architecting parts of your organization. So trying to really holistically gather all of that information and make it available to your decision makers is I think, one of the best things that you can do. So broadening incident retrospectives can lead to just more learning, right? Improvements to your process, improvements to your product. This is not an optional activity. Like, we all run and manage complex systems. You're going to have incidents. So it makes sense to try and leverage them to the best of their abilities. Bringing it on home, people. Lunch is right there. So I'll let you all read this, but the whole idea is bring customer empathy because it changes the lens at which you look at the whole incident experience, right? Instead of strictly technical or strictly impacting individual humans, if everyone can rally around the idea of an improved customer experience, you can get a lot of value out of these non-optional activities.